Hi, I was asked to speak briefly about my experiences converting a module over to both online but also a flipped classroom. So I did this for a third year undergraduate psychology course called Cognition. Now, this really was made up of two parts, an online learning part where the students would go through the material in advance of the scheduled classes, and then the actual scheduled class itself. So in terms of the online learning materials, students basically worked through the contents that I provided. So this was essentially a mini book chapter that I had written up and some videos that I produced. Now, I think one of the benefits of this is that they can go through this material in their own time. So to give you a bit of an idea about what this looked like, we have information on Blackboard, and it consisted of some text in order to set the scene with some videos embedded within that. So they would, like I say, be able to go through this in their own time. Now, in order to produce the videos, I did go a little bit over the top perhaps, and I invested in a decent microphone and some lighting. I already had an SLR, so that was probably the most expensive part, but I owned that to begin with. I think a completely respectable minimal setup would just be your laptop, but I think getting a decent microphone is important if you're expecting students to go through a decent amount of video content. So what did I do? I co-teach this module, and so I taught the first 5 weeks, and that's over now. So I didn't realise quite how much work I put into this until I added it up, but it looks like I basically wrote, there were 5 sessions, and in total we have about 14,500 words, and I produced 34 videos. These range in length from, let's say, between 5 minutes and 15 minutes. The videos were produced directly from my kind of existing teaching material, although I will be honest, it did take some time in order to convert, let's say, a 2-hour slide deck into some writing and then a video. But I enjoyed doing it. It was good. Here and there, I also inserted some other videos simply because there are so many great videos on lots of topics out there and available. Now, they run through this content in their own time. I think that's something that they really like about it. But then we come together for a live session, a live scheduled session, and that is held in Collaborate. And I made extensive use of Mentimeter. The students loved using Mentimeter. And what we would do in our 2-hour live sessions is basically a quick bit of housekeeping. So I might talk about assignments. They have a separate dedicated session on assignments, but you just get typical kind of housekeeping things that you have to talk about. But then using Mentimeter, we went through about 30 minutes of spaced repetition questions. So for example, if we're doing a live session for week 4, I would basically ask them anywhere between 5 and 10 questions, but these would not only be based upon the week 4 material, they would also be based upon week 1, 2, 3 and 4. And I think that's something that the students really like. It gives them a bit of meta-awareness of, oh, well, I only studied this topic a couple of weeks ago, and I was able to remember the answer to this question, but I wasn't able to answer the other question. So that was really useful. After the spaced repetition questions, we went on to a live Q&A. So again, this used Mentimeter. I'm really a fan of this. So students are able to type in their questions, and one of the really nice things about it is that the students can see all of the questions that have been submitted and they can upvote them. And on my end of things, I basically see the next most highest rated question. And so that's really handy because it means that you don't get lots of duplicate questions, and it also means that you're addressing the questions that most of the students have. So that 2-hour session, I have to say, was really fun for me as a lecturer. And so this really speaks to the flipped aspect of the changes that I made. Rather than spending 2 hours just delivering lectures, I always would try to build in elements of feedback and interaction. But I think most people who have tried this have found that it can be quite difficult to get student engagement, especially in large classes of about 80 to 100 students. And so I would say that my experiences in this 2-hour live session were profoundly different from anything that I've experienced in a lecture class. Really engaging for me, but also the students as well. So in the last session, I elicited some feedback, and this actually shows you the kind of output that you can get in Mentimeter as well. And so what I asked the students to do was to consider 3 different types of teaching. So traditional lectures in a lecture hall, they all would have experienced this in the past because we're talking about third year students. I also asked them to consider online live lectures, and they have experienced these as well. That's the approach that some of my colleagues have taken. And then I also asked them to consider the online flipped classroom approach. And for each of these 3 different approaches, I asked them to rate both the kind of learning and how much learning they were doing. And so what we can see here on the x-axis, that the online flipped classroom was rated as a much more active style of learning as opposed to passive. And we can also see that they rated the online flipped classroom, the learning was rated as that they had learned more and maybe to a deeper extent. Now, I won't go into the differences between a live lecture in a lecture hall versus an online live lecture. These seem to be rated reasonably similarly, to be honest. I have to say I did not do any statistics, which is very naughty of me, but this feedback really aligns with the kind of written feedback that they gave me. Now, I think one of the really great things about this was Mentimeter. So if you haven't seen this before, what happens is you can create a series of slides. They're normally based around questions. That's what I did, but you can also put just small bits of information in there as well. And the students on their mobile phone or perhaps in another browser window would go to menti.com and they would type in a very short code, and that takes them to my slide deck. And so they're able to see the questions and to vote on them. And I thought and they thought that this was really great. So much so that when we go back to direct face-to-face teaching, I'm still going to use Mentimeter. I'm going to keep the flipped classroom approach. So all of this online material I have created, we will continue to use. But even when we're in a live lecture, rather than going through my repetition questions and my kind of live questions rather than asking people to interact by putting their hands up and so on. I'm just going to use Mentimeter again. My feeling is that the anonymous nature of this is one of the really key components that encourages student interaction. So I've been talking about student feedback, so I thought I'd just read out a couple. And of course, I was very glad that they enjoyed the module, but many of them wanted me to convey this to other people. So the first one, I liked learning at my own rate and pausing when needed. It helped for when we have the lecture, as then I know what we are talking about and can ask questions then and there. Second bit of feedback was the flipped classroom approach is really useful. It gives us a chance to think about the questions we didn't even consider ourselves. Yeah, that's great. So, like I say, students would see everybody else's questions and upvote them. And because I don't have to focus on content delivery in the 2-hour class, it means that I can really spend quite a lot of time on each question. So that was really great. The final piece I'll show you is, can you please pass on the positive feedback about the flipped classroom to the other module leaders? So these are just 3 quotes, but they are indicative of the feedback that I had. So if you haven't told already, I am very glad that I made this transition to the online flipped classroom. I won't lie, it was a fair bit of work, to be honest, but now this material is there and it's available, and I'm really looking forward to next year actually, where I can get similarly high levels of engagement, hopefully directly face to face in a lecture theatre as normal. So I hope that was useful.